29th of August, 1776. I was very demurely perusing some papers, when, all of a sudden, there came such a peal of thunder from the British ships that I thought my head would go with the sound. I made a frog's leap for the ditch and lay as still as I possibly could, and began to consider which part of my carcass was to go first. The next day the British showed themselves to be in possession of our works upon the island. It was on a Sabbath morning, the day in which the British were always employed about their deviltry, because, they said, they had the prayers of the church on that day. We lay very quiet in our ditch, waiting their motions, till the sun was an hour or two high. We stayed several days longer in New York, when one morning we discovered that several ships had advanced up and was lying above Governor's Island, close under the Long Island shore. They seemed to portend evil. One evening, while lying here, we heard a heavy cannonade at the city, and before dark saw 4 of the enemy's ships were coming up the East River. They anchored just below us. Half of our regiment was sent off under the command of our major to man something that were called lines, although they were nothing more than a ditch dug along on the bank of the river with the dirt thrown out towards the water. We arrived at the lines about dark and were ordered to leave our packs under a guard and go into the lines without them. What was the cause of this piece of wise policy I never knew, but I never saw my knapsack from that day to this, nor did any of our party unless they came across them by accident in our retreat. We manned the lines and lay quite as unmolested during the whole night. We had a chain of sentinels quite up the river for 4 or 5 miles in length. At an interval of every half hour they passed the watchword to each other. "All is well." I heard the British on board their ships answer, "We will alter your tune before tomorrow night." And they were as good as their word for once. It was quite a dark night, and at daybreak the first thing that saluted our eyes was all the 4 ships at anchor and within musket shot of us. As soon as it was fairly light, we saw their boats coming out of a creek or cove on the Long Island side of the water, filled with British soldiers. When they came to the edge of the tide, they formed their boats in line. They continued to augment their forces from the island until they appeared like a large clover field in full bloom. The British played their parts well. Indeed, they had nothing to hinder them. We kept the lines till they were almost levelled upon us, when our officers, seeing we could make no resistance and that we must soon be entirely exposed to the rake of their guns, gave the order to leave the lines. In retreating, we had to cross a level, clear spot of ground 40 or 50 rods wide, exposed to the whole of the enemy's fire, and they gave it to us in prime order. The grape shot flew merrily, which served to quicken our motions. When I had gotten a little out of the reach of their combustibles, I found myself in company with one who was a neighbour of mine when at home, and one other man belonging to our regiment. Where the rest of them were, I knew not. We went into a house by the highway, in which were 2 women and some small children, all crying most bitterly. We asked the women if they had any spirits in the house. They placed a case bottle of rum upon the table and bid us help ourselves. We each of us drank a glass, and bidding them goodbye, betook ourselves to the highway again. We had not gone far before we saw a party of men, apparently hurrying on in the same direction with ourselves. We endeavoured hard to overtake them, but on approaching them we found that they were Hessians. We immediately altered our course and took the main road leading to King's Bridge. We had not long been on this road before we saw another party just ahead of us, whom we knew to be Americans. Just as we overtook these, they were fired upon by a party of British, and all was immediately in confusion again. I believe the enemy's party was small, but our people were all militia, and the demons of fear and disorder seemed to take full possession of all and everything on that day. When I came to the spot where the militia were fired upon, the ground was literally covered with arms, knapsacks, staves, coats, hats, and old oil flasks. Myself and the man whom I mentioned as belonging to our company, we did not tarry to let the grass grow much under our feet. We had to advance slowly, for my comrade, having been sometime unwell, was now so overcome by heat, hunger, and fatigue that he became suddenly and violently sick. I took his musket and endeavoured to encourage him on. We soon came in sight of a large party of Americans ahead of us, who appeared to have come into this road by some other route. We were within sight of them when they were fired upon by another party of the enemy. They returned but a very few shots and then scampered off as fast as their legs would carry them. When we came to the ground they had occupied, we found a wounded man and some of his comrades. I stopped to assist them in constructing a sort of litter to lay him upon, when my sick companion, growing impatient, moved on. We had proceeded but a short distance, however, before we found our retreat cut off by a party of the enemy stretched across the island. I immediately quitted the road and went into the fields, where there happened to be a small spot of boggy land covered with low bushes and weeds. Into these I ran and, squatting down, concealed myself from their sight. Several of the British came so near to me that I could see the buttons on their clothes. They, however, soon withdrew and left the coast clear for me again. I waddled on as well and as fast as I could, and I soon found my sick friend sitting near a fence with his head between his knees. I told him he should not die there nor anywhere else that day if I could help it, and at length, with more persuasion and some force, I succeeded in getting him upon his feet again. After proceeding about half a mile, we came to a place where our people had begun to make a stand. A number had collected here, having been stopped by the artillery officers. They had 2 or 3 field pieces fixed and fitted for action in case the British came on, which was momentarily expected. We were stopped here, a sentinel being placed in the road to prevent our going any further. It was now almost sundown. There came to the sentinel an old acquaintance of his, with a canteen containing some sort of spirits. After drinking himself, he gave it to the sentinel, who took a large pull upon it. They then fell into conversation together. I kept my eyes upon them, and when I thought I saw a chance of getting from them, I gave my companions a wink, and we passed by the sentinel without his noticing us. A walk of a very few rods concealed us from his view, and thus we escaped. We went on a little distance, when we overtook another man belonging to our company. He had just been refreshing himself with some bread and dry salt fish. I longed for a bite, but I felt too bashful to ask him. We still proceeded, but had not gone far, when we came up with the regiment, resting themselves on the cold ground after the fatigues of the day. Our company all appeared to rejoice to see us, thinking we were killed or prisoners. I was sincerely glad to see them, for I was once more among friends.